What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another Four Corners video breaking down tonight's NBA slate, courtesy of Osmo.com. Today we've got a pretty tough 6-game slate to break down, so help me out, help the channel out, like this video right now, and leave a comment down below telling me which player you're liking the most on tonight's slate. Also, any questions you have, leave them in the comments down below. I'll jump in later and talk with you guys, so again, like the video right now, help us out quite a bit, and leave a comment as well. First corner I want to hit on is a game with the Thunder visiting the Wolves. This one is a 234-point total, which is the highest on the slate, and it represents a 5.4-point boost for Minnesota and a 0.8 boost for the Thunder. Right now, Dennis Schroeder is projected to be the highest owned player on tonight's slate at 38% expected ownership, and that does check out with how he played in his last game. He put up 40 minutes and 47.5 fantasy points in those minutes, while shooting just 6 for 22 last game versus Memphis. He's been the biggest beneficiary of the usage that Paul George leaves behind, and Paul George, again, expected to be out today. So Dennis Schroeder, it makes sense to match that ownership. I don't know that he has a crazy high ceiling, but I'd be afraid of, let's say he shot 15 for 22, and you miss out on that. That would be less than ideal, and this is a very winnable matchup, so I would want to get close to matching the field on Dennis Schroeder today. Russell Westbrook has not been great without Paul George so far. In the game since George went out with his shoulder issues, he's had 60.25 fantasy points versus Philly, 41.25 versus San Antonio, and 45 versus Memphis. This is a good spot. I think the Philly spot was also a pretty decent one, but the San Antonio and Memphis spots, not the best ones. I think this one is substantially better versus the Timberwolves, so I like Russell Westbrook getting back on track here. At under 20% expected ownership right now, I'm pretty excited about that because I think this is a good spot for Westbrook. People may think that he's just a bad play without Paul George. That doesn't make sense. He should be a good play, and I think if he's going to get on track, this game versus the Wolves is the one to do it. Steven Adams' rebounding and usage has been up without Paul George. I think he looks like a strong play again. He's going to need to pick up some more rebounds. It's going to be a good spot for him versus Towns. He should be in a lot of action as well, defending Towns. So maybe there's a little bit of risk there that the time spent defending Karl-Anthony Towns takes a little bit off the table with his energy on the offensive side. But overall, I think he's going to have a good day. Pick and rolls, Amrin runs versus this Wolves team who's not that great inside. It's a nice spot for Steven Adams at a very nice price. Jeremy Grant has had 17, 14, and 11 shots in the games without Paul George in this recent stretch. I think he's in a good spot here, going to go under owned as well. People not necessarily keying in on the fact that Jeremy Grant's going to shoot a little bit more. And again, this Wolves team very bad defensively, so those shots should count for a little more here. I think Jeremy Grant is an interesting lower owned play. Karl-Anthony Towns' recent hot streak of 3 straight games over 70 fantasy points came to an end versus the Wizards of all teams, and it's also a bit of a concern for me with this matchup versus Steven Adams. Karl-Anthony Towns has been under 35 fantasy points in 2 games versus the Thunder so far this year. That's not great. I think there could be some issues with the matchup with Adams. I don't love the spot for Towns. I think you could still play him. He's shown he can beat any spot, so I don't want to fully rule out Towns, but I think his 16% ownership, I'll probably come in a little bit underneath that because I do think Adams might just have his number. It's gone the opposite way for Andrew Wiggins versus the Thunder this year. He has games of 44 fantasy points and 64.5 fantasy points on 11 for 20 and 11 for 24 shooting, respectively, in games versus the Thunder. The defense for the Thunder only getting worse without Paul George, so I think this is a nice spot, again, where you could see Wiggins go. It's hard to trust Andrew Wiggins, like we've talked about in many of these Four Corners videos. He is a boom or bust play, a guy who can screw you over in a variety of ways, but I think the success he's had versus the Thunder, there's probably a reason for that. I think that this is a nice spot for Wiggins to continue going, especially if he is going to be a little bit lower owned than Karl-Anthony Towns. Jeff Teague has been back in the lineup, and he's at a good price. He hasn't had a lot of success versus the Thunder this year, but again, the price is really what I'm looking at here. I don't love the spot for him, but I think some exposure does make sense because, again, it's just a nice price. And we do have another couple of point guard plays like Schroeder and another guy we're going to talk about in a little bit who are in the same price range and could falter in some way relative to Jeff Teague. So if Jeff Teague has an outlier day, could be an interesting play. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Celtics visiting the Warriors, and this one has a 229.5 total, but doesn't offer an appreciable boost for either team. The first guy I think you have to look at here is Kyrie Irving. The question to me is, which Kyrie Irving are we going to get? In the last couple games, he shot just 15 and 11 times, and there's been a lot of issues just in that locker room for the Celtics. But in his previous game versus Golden State, he did have 60 fantasy points. He did shoot 27 shots, so I think that's a pretty good situation for Kyrie Irving if he's going to be that player today. I think there really are concerns, though, with the Celtics and how they're approaching things, trying to get more guys shots in a way to make them all happy. I think Kyrie's also just been a moody player recently, even by his standards, so there's some risk to this play, but at low ownership and a matchup which could be treated like a playoff game by these two sides, the Celtics need a win. The Warriors, I'm sure, have some hate in their heart for the Celtics because the Celtics are a team who are a potential finals contender, so I think this is a spot that could end with a playoff-like atmosphere, so I will have some exposure to Kyrie, but I won't be surprised if he completely lets me down. Al Horford's been down after a hot stretch, but he did put up 48.75 fantasy points versus these Warriors just a little bit over a month ago. And I was with DeMarcus Cousins in the lineup as well, not seeing his full run, but I think overall that does mean that Horford has some decent upside here. I don't mind him today, and I think I will play him in some lineups in which I have Kyrie. Marcus Morris is coming off of a hideous 18-minute effort, didn't hit a shot in that game versus Houston. I like him in a bounce-back spot here. I think they're going to need his scoring, or at least he's going to get a shot to contribute to the scoring overall for the Celtics in a matchup where they should need it versus the Warriors. So Morris in a bounce-back spot intrigues me a little bit, though he has been looking a little bit worse for wear in recent weeks. Jason Tatum's a guy I'm going to talk about because he should be a better play at this point. His price is down. I should want to play him. I don't really want to play him. I think he's closer to the pack of Jaylen Brown and Gordon Hayward, who looks like a pretty interesting value, but has been really bad recently. Hayward, that is. I think overall Tatum is a little bit of an interesting play. I just don't see him being that much better than Brown or Hayward in terms of looking for another scorer in the Celtics lineup who's going to have to contribute some points. So I think all these guys are somewhat playable. I would probably rank them Tatum, Hayward, then Brown, but it's really close with all of them because they just haven't been exceeding their ceilings in any meaningful way recently. Klay Thompson is questionable as of me recording this video, but he looks like the best mix of price and upside if he were ruled in. If he's rolled out, obviously going to open up some more usage for Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. I think I would slightly favor Durant in that situation, but overall, I think that Klay Thompson, if he's rolled in, would be my favorite play out of that threesome. Draymond Green looks like a pretty decent value play, and he's going to have 20% ownership expected for him because of that. He had 37.75 fantasy points versus Boston about a month ago. I think he looks fine again. The ceiling, I think we haven't seen a lot of ceiling from Draymond, so I don't know that I would want to load up, but getting close to where the field is, I think seems fair because he is a pretty nice value on a day in which there isn't a ton of value overall on the slate. DeMarcus Cousins had 36.5 fantasy points in 23 minutes in that game versus the Celtics a month and a half ago. He's not going to have that same per minute rate one would think. Again, he's been playing more minutes and he's just been a little bit less effective across more minutes, but his price is up as well. So not a spot where I'm dying to go to Cousins, but I think if he fell to me in a couple of lineups, I wouldn't hate it. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Bulls visiting the Pacers. This one has a 218.5 combined total, which represents a 4-point boost for Indiana and a 0.8 boost for Chicago. Darren Collison's 36% expected ownership puts him right behind Dennis Schroeder in terms of being the highest owned guys on the slate. I think it's a good spot for Collison. His price is also pretty reasonable, and his assist upside should be a little bit stronger as well because the Bulls team just allowing a lot of field goals from pretty much deep and from the floor. So everywhere on the floor, you're going to get shots that are going to go in versus the Bulls. Collison's a decent play, though. The ceiling I would worry about a little bit, so I'm okay with Collison. I don't know that I want to go exactly as high on the ownership as a lot of people are expected to be. Miles Turner continues to be in a pretty good spot with Domantas Sabonis sideline. This matchup versus the Bulls as well, one that allows a slate high in blocks. Just a number of ways that he should be able to contribute here with the scoring as well. I like him a little bit more than Darren Collison, given the fact they're similarly priced, and Turner's going to be under 10% owned, but there's nothing limiting you from playing both guys in the same lineup. Obviously, they do very different things, and neither terribly usage dependent. But I think Turner's in a good spot, and I would actually prefer him on Collison if we were going to rank Pacers. Bojan Bogdanovic and Thad Young are pretty comparable plays to me. I think Thad Young more of a cash game play. He's got some more safety, a little bit less ceiling. Bojan Bogdanovic has shown the higher ceiling, 53.25 fantasy points in the last few weeks. So he's shooting a little bit more. I think that gives him the upside. He's a better tournament play to me, but I think both guys are certainly in play. And again, this Bulls defense just not very good and getting worse by the week. So I think it is a spot where they can both get going. And on a slate without a lot of noticeable cheap value, I think Wesley Matthews is a guy to consider. He hasn't hit 30 fantasy points versus Indiana so far, but the usage is close. If he gets a hot shooting day, I think he can get there. Not a guy I'd want to load up on, but if he works and he helps you get some higher priced guys into the mix, I think he's a perfectly okay play. Zach LaVine has a lower back injury, which didn't look too great in the second half of the back-to-back versus the Hawks. He had a pretty tough day there, but overall he's been really good. He also put up 46.75 fantasy points versus these Pacers just about a month and change ago in early January. I think he's in a good spot again. The Pacers defense hasn't gotten any better since then, and LaVine has, I think, overall gotten a little bit more steady, a little more reliable. So LaVine is an interesting play to me. I think he's also a compelling part of a game stack if you were to attack this one. Otto Porter's a guy who's been good in spots that appear to be bad on paper. His 2 games versus Memphis recently, 56.5 fantasy points and 44 fantasy points versus the Grizzlies, I think would be the most comparable here to what he's going to face versus the Pacers. And I think he's in a good spot. I think he's a reasonable price. And again, if we are going to stack up some Bulls versus this Pacers team, he would be another part of that I would really strongly consider. Lauri Markkanen is at a tough price, but his shots and rebounds make him playable in any matchup. I'm not dying to get to him, but I think if I can afford him, and if I am trying a couple of stacks of this game, he would be one of the guys I would consider. Robin Lopez, though, I would say is on the other side of things where he's just too high priced to play. But Lauri Markkanen, his high price is probably going to drive down his ownership. So I think that makes him a little bit interesting in this kind of spot. The last corner I'm going to hit on is a game with the Magic visiting the Sixers. This one is a 222.5 combined total, and it represents a 3.3 point boost for Orlando. Nikola Vucevic had a 70.75 fantasy point triple-double versus his former team, the Sixers, earlier this year. I don't foresee that happening, but I think at under 15% ownership we're projecting for him right now. He's an interesting play who should only get better because of Joel Embiid not being in the lineup. Vucevic is one of the centers who has a lot of upside here, and there really aren't any centers who are at a decent price who are going to give you a ton of upside, so I think that Vucevic would be one of the guys I would strongly consider. Evan Fournier is a slightly better value than Aaron Gordon. That would give me the slight favor towards him. Also less ownership, which makes him a little bit more appealing. But ultimately, Evan Fournier and Aaron Gordon, I think, are guys who are not going to spike crazy high ceilings because they're competing for the same usage. So I think if you see one of those guys have a decent day, the other one's probably going to have a less good day. I would prefer Fournier again. The price and the less ownership makes him a little more appealing, but you could play either one, and I just would be less inclined to play them both together. It's a decent bounce back spot for Terrence Ross, a guy who I will talk every time that we mention the Magic. That is my solemn promise to you. He will get you either single-digit fantasy points or will get you over 30 fantasy points, and his price is down enough where I think I'll take a few stabs at him. He had a single-digit fantasy point outing last time, so that means he's due. That's just what Terrence Ross does. He's not ever a bad play. He's not ever going to be a play you feel confident about, but this matchup versus the Sixers second unit does seem like a decent one for Terrence Ross to hit him on the head like a little gopher, and if he has his good day today. 3 out of the last 5 games for DJ Augustin have been over 30.25 fantasy points, and I worry a little bit the Sixers D, which is really rounding into form, could limit his assist upside a bit. They've been closing out on 3-point shooters in particular really well, but Augustin has been doing a good job, so I don't mind him. I think his price is up enough where he's not a guy I'm trying to force into lineups at all, but I think he's an okay play, just a guy with some concerns because of how the Sixers have been playing. JJ Redick's price is down after an iffy run. He hasn't been that great since Joel Embiid went out. I think also he's been affected by not having those dribble handoffs and those screens that Embiid provides him to give him a little space from deep. But he has had a good run versus the Magic, his former team. 48 fantasy points and 36 fantasy points versus Orlando this year. He's at 20% ownership. I think that feels a little high for him, but I think some exposure to Redick does make sense because it's not a bad matchup for him. It's just one where I think I would worry more about how the Sixers offense is functioning without him as a key part. Jimmy Butler's had 16 or more shots in his last 3 games. I think that's where you really want Jimmy Butler to be. He hasn't been hitting a ton of shots there, so we haven't seen that ceiling spike. But if they fall, I think he could see a higher ceiling day here. He's going to be at comparable ownership to JJ Redick, and I would honestly much prefer paying a little bit more for Jimmy Butler. Ben Simmons' last 2 games have been 54.25 and 66.25 fantasy points versus the Thunder and the Warriors. Both of those are tougher matchups than Orlando, though Orlando's defense has been rounding in form. I think this is a good spot, though, to keep riding that hot hand for Ben Simmons. I like him in this matchup, and I think overall he would be a key part of any stacks of this game. Tobias Harris currently looks like the lowest owned Sixer, but he's been shooting about 20 times a game, and I think that even though he doesn't have the ceiling of a Butler or Simmons, I think he's a guy who's much more reliable than JJ Redick, so I like Harris a decent amount. I actually think you could play both Butler and Harris together, and Ben Simmons as well in the same lineup. I think this is an interesting spot to attack, not a fantastic team total. I think the matchup could be one that ends up seeing some more points than Vegas currently expects. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's NBA slate. And of course, I do have more. If you click the link in the description, that's a switch and hedge column that I have at Awesemo.com. Break down all the games there, as well as more details on the ownership projections we have and how I'm addressing that. So go ahead, click that link in the description right now. And of course, make sure to like the video and leave a comment. Any questions you have as well, drop them in the comments down below. But the likes help us out so much, helps us get this video seen by more people. And that's really all I care about, being seen by as many people as possible who are hearing the great points I bring up every day in this video. So please like the video right now and leave a comment. And of course, use the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'm going to try a new hand gesture here for the promo code. I don't know if I'm getting it in the right spot, but I'm going to try. Use this promo code to get half off your first month at Awesemo.com. All the ownership projections and rankings right at your fingertips, as well as a premium Slack. A lot of people in there, not just our staff, regular people in there, a couple thousand people who are contributing every day, talking about what they're seeing on slates, asking questions, bringing some good ideas and different data points they're seeing in there as well. So use that promo code Switch and Hedge to get half off your first month at Awesemo.com. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Four Corners video breaking down another NBA slate. So good luck.